Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that tries to tell you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in less than 20 minutes or so. Sam, I think we hit 21 minutes the other day, which is a disaster for this brand, so we must do better today.
Won't happen again. Good morning, it's Thursday the 19th of September. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and as ever, I'm joined by Jack Blanchard of Politico, and we're in the lead up to Labour conference, which starts on Saturday. But Jack, clearly the front pages of the papers are pretty horrible for Labour this morning, and there's a little bit of a sense of drift. What do they even want us all to be talking about? I'm just quite confused what they're up to.
Well, the story that the Labour Party and the government are announcing today are about a crackdown on late payments for small businesses. And to be fair to them, if you run a small business, this is often a massive problem, and some small businesses go bust because of this, and therefore they're consulting on new laws to try and force big businesses to be better at paying small businesses on time. And I'm sure that they would tell you, Sam, that all the tittle-tattle that you are about to embark upon talking about over the next 20 minutes is far less important to real people out in the real world who are trying hard to run their businesses, and all you people, journalists like you, care about is who's paid what and who's briefing against who, and none of that really matters at all.
I am sceptical that would ever have made much of an impact. And I do think, after the last decade of British politics, how stable is our government is a pretty good question to be asking by political journalists. Look, the government are working incredibly hard at the moment, and so it'll be fascinating to see what happens at Labour conference. I even bumped into one cabinet minister just before 10 o'clock last night going for a kebab to fuel them as they went late into the night, because there's actually a kebab joint in Westminster up near where we work. So there are ministers putting in the hours, but the fruits of it we aren't quite seeing yet, and the vacuum is being filled with stuff they wouldn't want to see. Jack, what are we going to talk about today?
We are going to talk about the woes of the current government. It cannot have escaped people listening to this podcast that there's a couple of big stories that are concerning members of the lobby. One about how much Sue Gray is paid after the BBC broke that news yesterday, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and one about Keir Starmer's apparent love of accepting freebies left, right and centre. And really, more importantly, what those things tell us, as Sam suggests, about this government, which is, of course, only a couple of months old. We need to talk about foreign affairs as well, because there's a big meeting happening in Paris today, including David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. They're going to be talking about the Middle East and the Ukraine war, both of which are very much moving targets at the moment, and we need to talk about that. And we better talk about interest rates, because there's a Bank of England decision coming today, and of course we saw the US Fed decision yesterday, which was a really big moment in terms of the global economy. So loads of stuff going on, pretty much covering everything from Westminster tittle-tattle all the way through to big foreign affairs. And Sam, we've only got 16 minutes left to do it.
If you've got any questions, WhatsApp us 07511 867 and we'll answer your questions. Let's kick off with Labour woes.
The BBC breaking the story yesterday lunchtime about the salary of Sue Gray felt like a sort of step down the line in stories that have been bubbling around the Labour Party for the last few weeks. I'm sure everyone saw the story. Sue Gray gets paid £170,000 a year more than the Prime Minister, more than any special advisor has ever been paid before in this country, as we understand it. 40 grand more than her predecessor under Rishi Sunak. Do people care how much Sue Gray gets paid? Well, some people will, but I think for me, the thing that's really interesting about that story is just how aggressively it was briefed by senior people in government. Like, most people don't know how much Sue Gray gets paid in government, but some people in there decided to not just ring up any journalist or just not let it slip out at some lunch, but go and contact the political editor of the BBC and aggressively brief this story about the pay packet of the most powerful person in Downing Street after the Prime Minister. And that is an extremely bad sign for how this government is doing 2 months internally. That shows you that stories that have been kicking around, whispers that we've been hearing, Sam, and I'm sure you've heard these briefings. I know how I have, about the place being, I don't want to say a nest of vipers, but definitely not a happy, well set up ship inside Downing Street. That can only be true when things like this happen, when leaks like this happen in such an aggressive way. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone letting it slip out. This was someone senior, and in fact, according to Chris Mason, multiple people then confirming a very aggressive story designed to undermine the Prime Minister's most senior aide, and it's a very bad sign for the way Number 10 operates.
When you put together this and the scale of the freebies that Keir Starmer was taking. At Sky, we relaunched Westminster Accounts last night. Westminster Accounts is our project with Tortoise Media where we basically turn all the data about money and politics into a giant spreadsheet. You can search it on our website, and it gives us access to league tables and data that you couldn't really get easily before. And we use that to do league tables of who takes what in Parliament. And since December 2019, Keir Starmer took more freebies than any other MP by a massive, massive margin. We'll come back to that in a second, but the thing that ties that, the big picture theme that ties up that and the story about Sue Gray is a real doubt amongst people from cabinet ministers down that this government and this Downing Street has a grip on the politics of what's going on. Too many mistakes are being made about the political handling of big issues, and that should be the responsibility of not only the Prime Minister, but his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray. Yet it is Sue Gray herself that is at the centre of so much of what we're going to talk about. I just want to start with a couple of thoughts about the Sue Gray story. Of course, it's all about the briefings. They were incredible. One was that Sue Gray will be the only pensioner to be better off in this government, which is really unpleasant. And you don't have to go far in this government to find people that were quick to express unhappiness with Sue Gray. Many of those people were government advisors, fellow special advisors, though. And here's one small health warning. Many of them are cross because their pay is lower than it was when they worked for the Labour Party. So there's a bit of bitterness out there. There's a bit of motive behind some of the briefing. But I have to say, Jack, when your army of advisors is cross, they're the people that sell the government to you. That's not a great look. I'm going to be honest. Sue Gray on around, we think, 170,000. There are dozens and dozens of people in Whitehall who are paid more than the Prime Minister. They publish this every year. I was looking through the document, £180,000 for the Chief Information Officer at the MOD, the Finance Officer of the Department of Transport on 225,000. Big salaries aren't unusual, so we've got to put it in a bit of context. But that context is the politics of the moment and a slightly more widespread unhappiness about Sue Gray. I think she thinks that this salary is justified because it's largely in line with the permanent secretary of a small government department. She thinks that the Prime Minister actively signed this off, and she thinks that it is unfair that there are people out to get her. And here's one detail. I think I'm led to understand that the finger of blame for the leaking, and I'm sure they would deny it, is being pointed at Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, who I think does not necessarily, or famously does not have a good relationship with Sue Gray. What does that tell us? That the dysfunction at the top of government involving Keir Starmer's most important aides, advisors and civil servants is not good.
I should say that whenever we write in Politico that the relationship between Simon Case and Sue Gray is not good, we get an immediately extremely firm denial on the record from the Cabinet Office, and there's probably one coming your way, Sam. However, people keep telling us that that is the case. And of course, it's important to say that Simon Case is definitely on his way out. He is going to be leaving the government in the next few months, and so this isn't someone who's got a long-term investment in making this work, at least on a personal level. I think I've been talking to people who've worked closely in this environment, and I have to say it doesn't sound like a happy ship. I was told it is very, very disjointed inside Downing Street with people working in different silos. There isn't a good meeting structure set up for people to talk to each other well. They talk about paranoia, about people holding information very, very close, about a very, very small group of people, mainly Sue Gray, really knowing what is going on and that information not being shared widely. And they said you can see that sometimes in the media handling of stories. When they're breaking, the government doesn't look like it's got a grip on things. And I would point to this freebies story as an interesting example, which when it was breaking at the weekend, there clearly wasn't a good line agreed on how do we respond to this. You had David Lammy coming on air, the Foreign Secretary, freelancing, talking about, well, we want taxpayers paying for the Prime Minister's suits and stuff, really not the talking points that you want the government to be coming out with if they want to remain at all popular. And it'll be interesting to see Johnny Reynolds, who's the business secretary, who's been sent out this morning to do the rounds, ostensibly to talk about this small payments thing, but he's clearly going to spend a lot of his time answering questions about these issues. Have they actually managed to sort out a line now, an agreed line that they can say that is some sort of answer to why all of this doesn't matter and isn't important? Because if they haven't, then this is just going to run and run and run. And I should say Keir Starmer himself will be facing the media today as well, Sam. He is going to do a big round of regional media interviews ahead of Labour conference, which is something that party leaders often do. But we'll all remember Liz Truss a couple of years ago facing this round of local radio interviews when she was really teetering on the brink and getting absolutely taken to the cleaners by one regional journalist after another. Again, Keir Starmer is going to have to do a lot better than that today. So when those interviews start dropping this afternoon, we're expecting the embargo to lift at 5 o'clock tea time. You're going to see 20 different versions of the same story of these regional journalists saying things like, X number of pensioners in my constituency are struggling. X number of pensioners in my constituency aren't getting their winter fuel payment, yet you've just accepted thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds in football tickets or whatever, and your chief of staff is getting paid this extraordinarily high figure. And how is that fair, Prime Minister? And once he's answered that question, the next one's going to ask him exactly the same thing.
I think the freebies thing is freaking out some in the Labour Party for a couple of reasons. In the Westminster account stuff we did, we highlighted how Keir Starmer had taken £35,000 in football tickets alone since December 2019. Now, the great justification for all of this inside the Labour Party when they're in opposition and to a certain extent now is, well, it's fine, there's no conflict of interest. Well, the public will decide about whether it's fine or not. But the problem is there is a massive decision connected with football going on at the moment, and that's to do with the new football regulator. And I understand that the advice from civil servants is never accept hospitality from an organisation connected with a decision that the government's in the middle of making. So Keir Starmer will be told, don't take tickets from football-linked organisations by the civil service, I'm told. And yet he is on the record this week saying, never going to an Arsenal game because I can't accept hospitality is pushing it a bit too far. I mean, all sorts of people are saying, why can't he just pay for his own tickets even if they're in a box? They had this round opposition. Keir Starmer ignored the objections. And this is another example of why people don't think Downing Street have got a political grip. One MP yesterday was saying they phoned up number 10 to ask, what do we say about freebies? And there just wasn't an answer. That's why it's unnerving people.
I had the first briefing yesterday to myself that they didn't think Sue Gray was going to last long in this job. I have to say, one of my reporters has been telling me for ages that she will not last barely the end of the year. I did not believe it for a minute. I thought, no, Keir Starmer's brought in someone very senior and very experienced who understands how government works. That's a very smart thing to do, and she's there for the long haul. The amount of anger and upset towards her now is such, and the way this is being dealt with, that I am starting to question how long Sue Gray is going to last in that job. And it's important to remember, Sam, that Keir Starmer has some history here. When things aren't going well for Keir Starmer, he is brutal. He is ruthless. You remember the Hartlepool by-election not very long ago when he was in opposition and Labour did very badly and it looked like Keir Starmer was in real trouble. He sacked almost everybody around him in his operation, people who'd worked with him for years, close friends and allies. There was a proper job, and he overhauled it, and it was a great idea, and he brought in a better operation, and he turned things around. He's shown he can do that before. So if he feels or he perceives that indeed his number 10 outfit is not working as it should be. Do not be surprised to see the Prime Minister turning on people closest to him and deciding, no, you're not up to the job. I can see that happening now, not now, but I can see that now in the near future if this doesn't improve.
There are people, I think, even in Downing Street who want an elegant exit for Sue Gray, perhaps to the Lords. She could become a minister. Look, Keir Starmer sacked Morgan McSweeney as Chief of Staff and he moved to a different role, a very successful role. He sacked Sam White as Chief of Staff. There is precedent. I'm told Keir Starmer doesn't get into the day-to-day of minutiae of this stuff, but he is paying attention to it, and he will hate the focus on this rather than what he wants to talk about.
Let's talk about foreign affairs, Sam, because we promised to do this under 20 minutes, and there is obviously a massive story. Well, there's several massive stories happening around the world, not least in the Middle East, where the extraordinary attacks from Israel and Hezbollah continued yesterday, now with exploding handheld radios. Following the exploding pages we saw earlier in the week. This is pretty much every newspaper's front page story, and you can understand why, not least because the comments from Israel's foreign minister that we are now entering, quote, a new phase of the war. That's the sort of phrasing that will send fear deep into the hearts of many in Whitehall, who have been, as we said yesterday, very, very worried about the threat of this war escalating into something much bigger and much more regional. There is an emergency meeting happening in Paris today of some of the most senior diplomats in the Western world. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, will be there. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, will be there. We've also got the foreign ministers from France, Germany and Italy. They call it the Quint, which is a phrase I've not heard for a very long time, but that's Foreign Office speak for these 5 important Western diplomats getting together. They are going to be talking about the risk of escalation and what on earth they can do about it. Blinken comes straight from Egypt, where he's been talking about this very issue yesterday. And I think, Sam, they'll also be talking about Ukraine, because there is, of course, another massive security crisis happening in the world. Keir Starmer was in Italy the other day talking to Giorgia Meloni about the use of Storm Shadow missiles, amongst other things, on Russia. And I think that will also be on the agenda in Paris as these 5 foreign ministers get together ahead of next week's UN General Assembly meeting, when the actual leaders will be getting together, Biden and Meloni and Starmer and so on, to discuss these issues then.
I think all eyes today also on the response of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. Hezbollah, with the exploding radios after the exploding pages, has been humiliated and wounded. So how they respond is critical. I was talking to a very senior government source yesterday about how they think this phase started. And I said, do we think that there is a direct line to Benjamin Netanyahu authorizing these attacks? And the response I got was, you've got to assume that's the most likely thing, and you've got a US president who wants peace. And it looks, they fear, as if you've got an Israeli prime minister that does not. And they said that Israel and the US have never been more at odds, and they worry that this is the start of something a lot worse. They hope it's just a signal, but it could be something more dramatic. Quickly, 1 minute on interest rates. We don't expect any change on that, do we? Interest rates should stay at 5% after inflation remained at 2.2%, as we said yesterday. Today's the day that the government get its first indication of what the public finances look like in the future, with the Office of Budget Responsibility giving their first forecast to the Treasury that will be published in the budget on October the 30th.
Exactly, and it's worth remembering the budget on October the 30th, this huge political moment for this government, their biggest so far. An awful lot about their reputation and indeed about the future of the country depends on that moment. You would want to be going into that on the crest of a wave, feeling match fit, feeling like the country's behind you, feeling like everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet. None of those things appear to be true about the Labour government at the moment, but of course they've got a few weeks to turn that around. And just on interest rates, very briefly, you're absolutely right. We'll get the Bank of England decision at 12. No one I've spoken to expects them to cut interest rates today, but we should just flag again, the US Federal Reserve cut interest rates big time on Wednesday, the first time in 4 years. That is a big moment for the global economy. And I think, whenever something like that happens, you sort of feel the waves juddering through the rest of the world over the next few days. And so I think, the economy remains the biggest story in town. And it will be all through the autumn, Sam. And I think, just to take things right back to the start, it's the cost of living crisis is the reason why these Sue Gray stories, these freebie stories actually matter in the end in this country, because people are looking at their own salary and their own living expenses and hearing stories like that. And that is what makes them angry.
That's why people don't want to see a government of self-service, as Keir Starmer didn't say on the steps of Downing Street. We're out of time. We'll see you back on Monday, where we'll be in Liverpool for Labour Party conference.
Can't wait. See you then.